Hello, good morning everyone, Rich Wang here, welcome back to the channel. This is the Fujifilm X-T50. It has almost everything you love about Fujifilm camera, like film simulation, retro style body design with lots of control dials. It shares a lot of features with Fujifilm's flagship X-T5, including the latest X-Trans 40 megapixel sensor, X-Processor 5, and this is the first camera in this series that has an in-body image stabilizer. But it's cheaper, smaller, and lighter than the X-T5. It also has some brand new features that are designed to make it very easy and fun to take photos. It really sounds like a perfect camera, but there are a few things that you need to be aware of if you are planning to buy this camera. In this review, I will share with you all my test results and real-world shooting experience after using this pre-production camera over the last few weeks. I will also share with you a lot of unedited photos that I shot using the X-T5 using different film simulations. Let's start this review by looking at the body design first. The X-T50 is a beautiful, compact, retro-style camera, like a smaller version of the X-T5. I don't think the X-T5 is a big camera at all, but when I put the X-T5 and the X-T50 next to each other, the X-T50 is much smaller, and suddenly the X-T5 feels much bigger and a lot more chunky. The Fujifilm designer also done a few things to make the X-T50 feels smaller. For example, the top half of the camera taper, so the X-T50 doesn't feel as blocky as the X-T5 or the X-T30. The body of the X-T50 feels very solid. The flagship X-T5 may feel a little bit more premium, but to me, the X-T50 feels better than most other APS-C cameras in the market. The camera grip is quite small and also flat to help keep the camera size small and also give you that beautiful retro style design. The downside is that the grip doesn't really provide a lot of support. The weight of the X-T50 is around 440 grams, while the X-T5 is just over 550 grams. So the weight difference is quite large. The difference in size and weight are very noticeable when you hold these cameras in your hand. The X-T50 is just much smaller and lighter. It is pretty amazing because the X-T50 now also has the in-body image stabilizer IBIS in the camera. This is one of the biggest improvements if you are coming from X-T30 or X-T3 or any of the previous generation Fujifilm camera that doesn't have IBIS, but we'll talk about the IBIS a little bit more later on in this review. The camera has a pop-up flash at the top of the camera. This is something not too many cameras do over these days, but I'm happy to see that because not only it helps when shooting in very dark places, you can also do some creative photo by combining the flash with long exposure. So we have the electronic viewfinder behind the flash. While it is not as big as the electronic viewfinder on the X-T5, it is still very good for a mid-range camera. And I just happened to pick up my Sony a7CR one evening after shooting with the X-T50, and I immediately noticed the electronic viewfinder on the X-T50 is much better than the one on the a7CR. I can see a lot more details and sharper image when framing the photo using the X-T50 compared to the a7CR. The camera has both the front and rear dial, which is also clickable. Apart from not having the D-pad at the back and the customizable button next to the lens mount at the front, we have pretty much all the usual buttons and controls, including the joystick at the back, and we also have the autofocus mode switch at the front. As this is a camera primarily designed for photography, the LCD screen is tiltable. You cannot flip it around. The screen quality is quite good and is very usable even on a bright sunny day. X-T50's screen is also quite a bit slimmer than the tiltable screen on the X-T5, so the screen doesn't extrude as much and that helps make the body a little bit slimmer. There's a shutter speed and exposure compensation dial at the top right of the camera. We also have a auto switch here. So if you don't want to worry about choosing the best camera settings, just flick the switch to auto and you can have the camera adjust all the settings for you. The camera would use machine learning or AI to detect what kind of scene that you are shooting, and it would adjust all the settings to give you the best looking photo. The camera doesn't just try to get the exposure correct in the auto mode, but it will also do things like choosing the most suitable shutter speed, the best aperture, and adjust the exposure compensation. Depends on what type of photos that you are shooting, just like what an experienced photographer would do when they are shooting in manual mode. And we have a brand new film dial on the left of the camera. So what is this film dial? There are more and more film simulations available on each new Fujifilm camera. I've counted and there are 20 different film simulations available on the X-T50. That includes the new Reala Ace that we recently saw on the X106. If you have watched my X106 review, you will know that Reala Ace is one of my favorite film simulation right now. Anyway, having a large number of film simulations is great, but with so many different film simulations, choosing and comparing different film simulation can be a bit of challenge because up until now, you have to go into the camera menu screen and then choose the film simulation you want to try. But this time with this new film dial on the X-T50, you can just rotate this dial to choose the film simulation you want to use. There are a total of 12 different film simulations that you can choose using the film dial. 5 of them are customizable, including the FS1, FS2, and FS3. You can assign any film simulation you want from the menu screen. The acros, you can also select your preferred acros film simulation. Then there is the C, which just stores the latest film simulation you choose from the menu screen. So with this film dial, choosing and trying out different film simulation is just very quick and easy. But more importantly, it is just a lot more satisfying with the tactile feedback you got when you are rotating the film dial. It just feels so good. I feel like the camera is really encouraging me to try out all the different film simulations available, as I find myself just turning the film dial all the time. Wow, I really love this new film dial. I know this could be a little bit controversial because if you don't shoot JPEG, then this new film dial is completely useless to you. On the left side of the camera, we have a microphone jack, which is now finally a 3.5mm one, a USB-C port which can be used to charge the battery, a micro HDMI port which I usually don't really like, but it doesn't really matter for the X-T50 as I don't imagine a lot of people would be using the HDMI port, even though you could connect an external monitor to monitor or record video externally. The camera only has a single SD card slot and it is located at the bottom of the camera next to the battery. I would like the SD card to have its own access door on the side of the camera, but this is not really possible with the X-T50 as the camera has a pretty small grip to keep the camera size compact and also its retro style design. Now, one good news is, even though it is a very compact camera, the battery door can still open easily even when the camera is mounted on a tripod, so you don't really have to remove the camera from the tripod every time you want to swap the battery or the memory card. The battery for the X-T50 is the NP-W126S, which is the same battery as the X106. If you're wondering why Fujifilm doesn't use the bigger battery, NP-W235, that is from the X-T5 or the X-H2, you physically just cannot fit that large battery on the X-T50 unless you make the grip much larger, which would then kind of defeat the design of this camera. I won't say X-T50's battery life is amazing, but I could still take 2 or 3 hours of photo easily with a single battery, so it's acceptable. But if you are planning to bring the camera to a trip and want to shoot whole day and take a lot of photos or videos, then definitely get a spare battery or two. Or you could get a USB power bank, as you can charge the battery using the USB-C port. One of the main new features the X-T50 has its predecessor doesn't have is the Inbody image stabilizer IBIS. Having the IBIS is a very useful and important update, and that would benefit both photo and video shooters. This is now especially important because the sensor is very high resolution, 40 megapixel, which means even a tiny bit of camera shake could result in a blurry photo. This is something you may not notice if you are shooting with a lower resolution camera. So having the IBIS to help minimize camera shake is really beneficial. As usual, I did some IBIS tests. First, I tested the photo mode performance. I shot a few hundred photos at different shutter speed, with and without the IBIS enabled. I was just hand-holding the camera and just standing normally. I then gone through all my test photos and see how many photos are perfectly sharp, and I plotted the results here. From my results, X-T50's IBIS is about 4 stops effective at 50mm focal length. In case this is the first time you watch my review, my IBIS test results is always different from and usually a lot lower than the official figures. Considering how small the X-T50 is, there really isn't much space for the IBIS unit, so I think the result I got is really good. And what it also means is, when I'm shooting under low light condition, I can shoot at a much lower shutter speed than if the camera doesn't have IBIS. So instead of shooting at 1/60th second at ISO 6400, I can shoot at 1/4 second instead, and that would allow me to shoot at ISO 400, so I can get much better image quality compared to a camera that doesn't have IBIS. And now let's have a look at the IBIS performance in video mode. I think the IBIS is even more important to videographers than photographers. It's because when you are taking photos, you could increase the shutter speed to minimize camera shake. But when you are shooting video, increase the shutter speed doesn't really give you more steady footage. So here is a side-by-side comparison to show you the IBIS performance when shooting video. Both cameras were shooting at 23mm focal length, so that's approximately 35mm equivalent focal length. The left camera is without any image stabilization. The right side is the X-T50 with the IBIS enabled. Both cameras were mounted on a solid rig and recorded at the same time. You could also enable the DIS, Digital Image Stabilization. The camera would apply a fairly small 1.1 times crop, and that would allow the camera to shift the image around to give you a smoother output video. If you look at this result, I think it looks pretty smooth when both the IBIS and DIS are enabled. One note about the DIS is that it is not available in every single video recording mode. For example, you cannot use DIS when recording 6.2K video or the 4K HQ video. I'm guessing that's due to processor limitation, as real-time image stabilization is quite a computationally expensive process. Another big upgrade that comes with the X-T50 is the 40 megapixel sensor that we have previously seen on the flagship X-T5 and X-H2. As I have an X-H2 myself, I really like this sensor, but for some people, they may have some concerns about the high resolution output. The first common concern is, would the low light performance be worse than the previous 26 megapixel sensor? Because usually high resolution sensor means poor high ISO performance. The second concern is, could we actually get more sharpness and details if we don't have the money to buy the best and most expensive lenses? So let's try to answer the first question first. So here are some photos I shot at base ISO, ISO 125, all the way up to maximum ISO. Since I don't have any RAW file support for the X-T50 at the moment, these are JPEG files straight from the camera. All the photos shot using the standard picture profile, and grain is set to none. From base ISO to ISO 800, the image quality remains excellent with great details and almost no noise at all. From ISO 1600 onwards, we're starting to lose a bit of fine details and getting a little bit more noise, but even at ISO 3200, the image quality is still decent. At ISO 12800, we see some noticeable drop in terms of image quality. The two highest ISO settings, ISO 25600 and 51200, are probably still okay for things like social media, but I would try keep the ISO under 12800 if I want to get some good quality photos. Now, the next thing I want to do is compare it with my X-T3, which has the 26 megapixel X-Trans CMOS 4 sensor, and see how's the photo from this new 40 megapixel sensor compared to the 26 megapixel sensor. Because the resolution is different, so I downscale the image from the X-T50 to 26 megapixel to do a fair comparison. Look at these two JPEG photos shot at the camera's base ISO. The image from the X-T50, even though it's now downscaled, still contains more fine details than the image from the X-T3. It's not a huge difference, but if you look at the Japanese or the English text on the Instax box, you should be able to see the difference quite easily. As we increase the ISO, the photo from the 40 megapixel X-T50 still maintains slightly more detail than the 26 megapixel X-T3. Even when we reach X-T3's maximum ISO, 25600, I think the image from the X-T50 is still better. Look at the text "Protect from X-ray" on the Instax box. Not only is more readable on the X-T50's photo, the color of the text is supposed to be red, but on the X-T3 photo, the noise reduction algorithm removed the color completely, make that black, while it remains red on the X-T50 photo. This is the first time I do a proper side-by-side test between the older 26 megapixel sensor and this new 40 megapixel sensor, and I'm a bit surprised by the results, as I thought the 40 megapixel photo would suffer a bit at the very high ISO, but it's really not the case, at least not with these JPEG photos. And now let's try to answer the second question. Actually, we kind of answered that already, because all these test photos were shot with the new 16 to 50mm kit lens. Yes, it's a new lens and a very nice one. I do have a review of this lens on my channel, by the way, so maybe go check out that review after you finish watching this video. But anyway, it's still a kit lens and it's not really an expensive lens at all. So if you look at the base ISO photos, we can see the photo shot with the 40 megapixel X-T50 gives us more details than the photo from the 26 megapixel X-T3. So if you are buying X-T50 with this kit lens, or any lens that is sharper or as sharp as this lens, then the X-T50's 40 megapixel sensor would capture more details than the camera using the older, lower resolution sensor. So anyway, if you are someone who thought X-T50's 40 megapixel sensor may be a downgrade for you because you don't need high resolution output and therefore you don't want to buy the X-T50, I hope this comparison test may make you reconsider it again. I think it's fair to say that most people who are interested in buying this X-T50 are primarily photographers. But the X-T50 still has some pretty decent video specs. The X-T50 can record video from full HD resolution all the way up to 6.2K. Maximum frame rate for 6.2K video is 30 frames per second. 4K video is 60 frames per second. Full HD is 240 frames per second. You have the option to record in 8-bit or 10-bit. You can choose between long GOP or all-eye codec. Bitrate can be as low as 50 megabit per second all the way up to 360 megabit per second. You can also record in f-log or f-log2 flat picture profile if you want. And I mentioned before, the camera has a 3.5mm microphone input and also a micro HDMI port. The camera also has lots of video recording tools like the tele lamp, red recording frame, and many other screen overlay tools as well. So in terms of specs and features, it's really not bad for a camera at this price point that is not primarily designed for video. Now, if you record in 6.2K resolution, there will be a 1.23 times crop. For 4K, there is a standard 4K that has no crop, and you can also go up to 60 frames per second. This is not oversampled output. Or you can record in 4K HQ mode, which also has a 1.23 times crop. The 4K HQ video quality is better than the standard 4K footage because the 4K HQ video is generated by oversampling from 6.2K recording. 4K HQ video is sharper, it has less artifacts, and even though the 4K HQ video has a small crop, the high ISO video quality is better than the standard 4K video. Having to apply a crop when recording some certain video quality is pretty common as it helps to improve the sensor readout speed. But one thing I really like about what Fujifilm has done is, when the video recording mode you choose requires a crop, it will show the crop number on the screen. So you know exactly if the video recording has a crop and how big the crop is. Since the camera sensor is very high resolution, one of the downsides when recording video is the slow readout speed. Rolling shutter is pretty noticeable, especially when recording in any of the oversampled mode, like the 6.2K or the 4K HQ. It is a lot better when you're recording in the normal 4K mode. And let's have a look at the video quality from the Fujifilm X-T50. All the following video footage you're going to see were shot at 4K HQ setting using all-intra codec. From base ISO to ISO 800, there is almost no noticeable difference in terms of details and noise level and the overall image quality. If we increase the ISO from ISO 800, the video quality would gradually decrease. At ISO 3200, the image quality is still reasonably good. At ISO 6400, we can see quite a bit of noise in the shadow area. But for casual use, I think the video quality is still quite alright. At ISO 25600, the image quality is now a lot worse. If we use the high-speed record feature to record slow motion footage in full HD resolution up to 240 frames per second, there's also a 1.23 crop as well. It seems the camera is doing line skipping, as I noticed the high-speed recording footage at 240 frames per second is not as detailed as the normal Full HD shot with the X-T50. Again, this is not unexpected. A lot of cameras would do the same when shooting at very high frame rate to help improve the sensor readout and processing speed. Real-world footage shot at Full HD 240 frames per second looks reasonably good. Now, one problem with compact mirrorless cameras that doesn't have active cooling system like the X-T50 is that the camera could overheat when recording high-resolution, high-quality video continuously for a long period of time. I did some testing with the room temperature is around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I record at the standard 4K resolution using the all-eye codec, 360 megabit per second with IBIS and continuous autofocus all enabled. The camera's temperature setting is set to high. With this setup, at around 45 minutes, the temperature warning sign shows up, and the camera managed to record a total of around 53 minutes, and then it shut down due to overheat. Then, after I let the camera cool down completely, I repeat the same test again and record in 6.2K with similar settings. I did tilt the LCD screen out a bit this time to allow the back of the camera to cool down a little bit more. But even with that, I can only get around 15 minutes, then the camera would overheat. If I record in 4K HQ, I get a little bit longer recording time, around 19 minutes. Now, since most people would only record short video clips that last maybe a few minutes longest at most, then you should be fine with the X-T50, even if you're trying to record 6.2K video, and you can get some beautiful video from it. Just remember, this is not the best camera for long continuous video recording, especially if you want to record in 4K HQ or 6.2K resolution output. The X-T50 has Fujifilm's latest autofocus algorithm. It has a much more advanced subject detection system. It can detect humans, animals, birds, cars, motorcycles, airplanes, and trains, just like the flagship X-T5 and X-H2, X-H2S. Subject detection works very well overall. The camera can detect human or animal head position even when your subject is quite far away, so I'm quite impressed by that. The new subject detection improvements makes take photos much easier. You just need to select the subject detection mode you want, and the camera does a very good job in detecting and focusing on your subject. The camera does sometimes incorrectly detect the background as human or animal, which, to be fair, all the camera would do that, but the X-T50 seems to do that a little bit more often than most other cameras that I've used recently. I could be wrong though, as I haven't done any extensive side-by-side comparison with another camera. But anyway, I feel very positive overall about X-T50's AI subject detection. It is definitely a big step up for anyone coming from a last generation Fuji camera. And you can use the AI subject detection when shooting video as well, even when you are shooting 6.2K video. Video autofocus performance is quite good. When I did my usual autofocus test in my garden, the camera detects my face and eye position very accurately and follow it very quickly. The actual autofocus also follows me reasonably well. When I'm moving very fast, the camera may need about half a second or so to catch up my movement. I don't really notice any pausing issue. Overall, the autofocus performance is quite good enough for most everyday usage, but there are room for improvements if Fujifilm want to deliver the best autofocus performance in the industry. Okay, next, let's talk about shooting photo using the burst mode. If you are shooting using the mechanical shutter, the maximum burst speed is 8 frames per second. But if you switch to electronic shutter, then it can go up to 13 frames per second at full resolution in either JPEG or RAW format or both, which is pretty fast. You can go even faster burst speed, up to 20 frames per second if you're okay with a 1.29 times crop and 24 megapixel output resolution. 24 megapixel is still a lot of resolution. So for a camera at this price point, the burst speed is really not bad at all. Just be aware that if you're shooting with the electronic shutter, you have the usual limitations, like you may see rolling shutter effect, depends on how you take your photos. In terms of photo buffer size, I did a few tests. First, I chose the 13 frames per second burst speed using the electronic shutter. The memory card I use is a SanDisk Extreme Pro UHS2 V90 memory card. It is a pretty fast card. When I shoot in fine quality JPEG, 40 megapixel output resolution, I can get about 64 photos, then the buffer would become full and the burst speed would start to slow down. So there's about 5 seconds or so of buffer shooting at 13 frames per second, which is not bad. However, if I switch to uncompressed RAW, then I can only get 18 shots before the burst speed starts to slow down. So there's about 1.5 seconds of buffer. If I choose RAW, lossless compress, it's a bit better. I got about 24 shots. If I switch to lossy compress, I got about 36 photos. So that's about just under 3 seconds. And if I switch to the mechanical shutter and shoot at the maximum burst speed, which is 8 frames per second, When shooting JPEG, the camera would just keep going forever. It seems the buffer just wouldn't fill up at all. So I stopped the test after the camera shot more than 500 photos because there really is no point to continue the testing. If I shoot in uncompressed RAW, then I can get around 20 photos. Lossless compressed RAW, I got around 25. And compressed RAW, I got 88. I think the photo buffer is not bad for a mid-level camera, especially we need to remember the file size is huge from the 40 megapixel sensor. But if you want to shoot sports or anything that you need a huge buffer, then you should go for the flagship X-T5 or X-H2, which has a much bigger photo buffer. Another feature that came with the X-T50, which I think a lot of people may not be very familiar with, is the Frame.io support. So what does this feature do? Basically, it allows the camera to wirelessly upload photos or video you capture to Frame.io's server. X-T50 is not the first Fujifilm X camera that has this feature, but unlike the X-H2 or the X-H2S that requires the optional grip for Frame.io support to work, the X-T50 doesn't need any extra accessory. The camera itself can directly connect to any Wi-Fi network and upload files to the internet directly. You can set up the camera to automatically upload immediately after you shot each photo or video. That will be very useful for professional users who are shooting events or weddings, so their editor can download the files to their computer pretty much immediately. For more casual users, you may want to manually upload the files later on instead. Imagine you are having a holiday and you are traveling to another place. When you back to your hotel in the evening, you can just plug in the camera to the USB port to charge the battery, and then at the same time you can connect the camera to the hotel's Wi-Fi network, enable Frame.io, and get the camera to upload the photos you shot that day to Frame.io server. This way, when you wake up the next morning, your camera is fully charged and you also have all your photos and videos backup securely on the Frame.io server. You don't need to bring a computer or any other devices to do the backup. Some of my regular viewers may remember I talked about Frame.io support in my recent Lumix S52 firmware update video, as Panasonic has also implemented this feature to their Lumix S52 and the S52X via a firmware update. Fujifilm and Panasonic's implementation are very similar and provide very similar features but slightly different in a few areas. However, there is one major difference, and because of that, I think Frame.io is a lot more user-friendly with this X-T50. So when you switch on the camera, both the Fuji and the Lumix would need around 10 to 20 seconds for the camera to connect to the Wi-Fi, which is normal. But with the Lumix camera, the Wi-Fi connection happens in the foreground. So it means you need to wait for the Wi-Fi connection to establish before you can start using the camera and take photos. Well, you could start take photo immediately if you want, but that would cancel the Lumix camera's auto Wi-Fi connection. But with Fujifilm's X-T50, the Wi-Fi connection happens in the background. So you can start using the camera immediately after you power it on. You can take photos straight away, you can record video straight away. You don't have to wait for the Wi-Fi connection to establish. That makes a huge difference, especially if you are professional users, as you really don't want to wait 10 to 20 seconds every time you turn on the camera. I do need to remind you two things about Frame.io. First thing, Frame.io is not a free service. If you already have an Adobe Cloud account, you can get a free 100GB Frame.io account, which is probably enough for casual users. But if you want more storage than that, or if you are not currently an Adobe Cloud user, then you will need to pay monthly subscription fee to use this feature. The second thing is, Enabling Frame.io on the X-T50, especially with the auto upload feature enabled, will drain the battery a lot faster because of the Wi-Fi connection and the background upload process. So these are two things that you need to consider if you're interested in using Frame.io. To me, Frame.io is one of those features that you thought you just don't really need it, but once you tried it once, you really want it for all your cameras. Now, if you have watched the review all the way up to here and you found this video helpful, I would really appreciate if you can click the like button or drop a comment to support me and my channel. It will only take you a second, but that would really help me and my channel to grow so I can create more videos like this for you guys in the future. Cameras are always about compromises. This is especially true for more compact cameras like this Fujifilm X-T50 because of size and price reasons. I think Fujifilm has done an excellent job with this X-T50. They managed to pack a lot of technology in such a compact camera without too many compromises. If you compare this camera with their flagship X-T5, yes, you don't have the second card slot. You have a smaller electronic viewfinder, you have smaller photo buffer, and the camera seems to overheat a bit faster when shooting long video. But other than that, you have pretty much all the main features. You have the same 40 megapixel sensor, the same X-Processor 5, it has IBIS, it has the same latest autofocus system, and most other important features as well. On top of that, the X-T50 has this new film dial. If you love film simulation, you would definitely love it. All this in a smaller, lighter, and cheaper body. That really is pretty good, isn't it? So who is this camera for? I think it's suitable for a few groups of users. If you're someone who has been just taking photos with your phone, but you want to get a proper camera, the X-T50 could be a great choice for you. While the camera has a lot of mechanical controls that you may not really know how to use, but you could just put the camera in auto mode and use it as a point and shoot camera. And when you want to improve your photography, you can start shooting in semi-auto mode or even full manual mode if you want, and you can grow with the camera. Or maybe you are someone who want to get a X100VI as you want a compact camera that you can carry around with you every day and you love the film simulation, but you're not too sure about the fixed 35mm equivalent lens on the X100, then the X-T50 could be a more flexible alternative that is pretty much just as compact and you still have all those film simulations. For example, the X-T50 with this funky limited edition 27mm lens from TT Edison is around the same size as the X100VI. The X-T50 doesn't have X100's hybrid viewfinder, but you have the flexibility to swap your lens. There are over 100 X-mount lenses available from Fujifilm and other third-party lens manufacturers, so the X-T50 is a lot more versatile than the X100. The last group of users is someone who already has a X-T5 or X-H2 or X-H2S and want a backup second camera. While the X-T50 is missing a few pro features, the image quality should be the same as the X-T5 or X-H2. It also has all the manual controls, so there is no reason it can't be a good backup or second camera, even for professional users. The price of the X-T50 is quite a bit more expensive compared to the X-T30, but since the spec of the X-T50 is very similar to the X-T5, including the same sensor and the same processor, I feel the price increase is justifiable. To be honest, if I haven't bought my X-H2, I would probably just buy X-T50 myself because it's cheaper, it's smaller and lighter, and I'm not sacrificing any image quality. Plus, I can use the frame.io feature without having to buy and attach the extra grip to my XH2, which makes the camera even bigger. Now, what do you guys think about this new Fujifilm X-T50? Would you be interested in getting one yourself? What do you like the most about the X-T50? Or is there something that you want but is missing from the X-T50? Drop a comment below and let me know. I would love to hear from you.